Hello guys, today I'm reading chapter 5, half of chapter 5 from the book What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20 by Tina Seelig. Chapter 5 is called The Secret Sauce of Silicon Valley. I require my students to write a failure resume. That is, to craft a resume that summarizes all their biggest screw-ups, personal, professional, and academic. For every failure, each student must describe what he or she learned from that experience. Just imagine the looks of surprise this assignment inspires in students who are so used to showcasing their successes. However, after they finish their resume, they realize that viewing experiences through the lens of failure forced them to come to terms with the mistakes they have made along the way. In fact, as the years go by, many former students continue to keep their failure resume up to date in parallel with their traditional resume of successes. I borrowed this assignment from Liz Kiesenweather at Penn State University. When I first heard the idea, I thought it was terrific. It's a quick way to demonstrate that failure is an important part of our learning process, especially when you're stretching your abilities, doing things the first time, or taking risks. We hire people who have experience not just because of their successes, but also because of their failures. Failures offer learning opportunities and increase the chance that you won't make the same mistake again. Failures are also a sign that you have taken on challenges that expand your skills. In fact, many successful people believe that if you aren't failing sometimes, then you aren't taking enough risks. Prodded by a former student, I decided to include here my own abbreviated failure resume, showcasing some of my biggest mistakes. I wish I had kept this resume up to date for the past 30 years. It would have been fascinating to revisit and learn from all the mistakes I've conveniently put out of my mind. Tina L. Seelig, Professional Failures. Not paying attention. Early in my career, I naively thought I knew how organizations worked. I made judgments about corporate culture that were incorrect. I wish I had spent more time paying attention and less time making assumptions. Quitting too early. While running my own business, I hit the wall. I got incredibly hard, both technically and organizationally, and was going to take a tremendous amount of effort to find my way to a solution. I wish I had been confident enough to fully commit to finding a solution. Academic failures. Not doing my best. The first 2 years of college, I didn't put my focused effort into all my courses. I missed the chance to extract the most value from the classes, a chance I can't get back. Relationship management. I had a challenging relationship with my PhD advisor. I wanted to spend a lot of time teaching, and she felt I should spend most of the time in the lab. I wish I had found a way to better align our goals. Personal failures. Avoiding conflicts. I had a boyfriend in college, and as we closed in on graduation, we were both stressed about where we were going next. Instead of dealing with the questions directly, I blew up the relationship. I wish I had been able to talk honestly about what was going on. Not listening to my gut. My uncle died in New York. I lived in California, and several people urged me not to travel to the funeral. I have always regretted it. I learned that there are some things you can't undo, and that in situations such as these, I should do what is right for me, not necessarily what others want me to do. Willingness to take risks and reactions to failure differ dramatically around the world. In some cultures, the downside for failure is so high that individuals are allergic to taking any risks at all. These cultures associate shame with any type of failure, and from a young age, people are taught to follow a prescribed path with a well-defined chance of success, as opposed to trying anything that might lead to disappointment. In some places, such as Thailand, someone who has failed repeatedly might even choose to take on a brand new name in an attempt to reboot his or her entire life. In fact, in the 2008 Olympics, a Thai weightlifter attributed her victory to changing her name before the Games. The Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, GEM, which publishes a detailed annual report on startup activity around the world, looks at cultural differences in risk-taking and comfort with failure. The GEM team found that important factors contribute to a society's risk profile. For example, in some countries such as Sweden, the bankruptcy laws are designed such that once your company goes out of business, you can never get out of debt. Knowing that failure has drastic long-term consequences for you and your family is a huge disincentive to try to start a company in the first place. The culture in other countries is equally unforgiving. Once you fail, your friends, neighbors, and colleagues will always view you as a failure. A recent issue of the Wall Street Journal describes humiliating tactics currently used by debt collectors in several countries, including Spain. The collectors literally show up at individuals' houses in bizarre costumes with the goal of drawing attention from the neighbors and shaming the debtors. Why would anyone in these communities risk public ridicule by taking on any unnecessary risk? This is in sharp contrast to Silicon Valley, where failure is acknowledged as a natural part of the process of innovation. Steve Jurvetson, a partner at the venture firm Draper Fisher Jurvetson, describes failure as the secret sauce of Silicon Valley, while Randy Commissar of KPCB notes that being able to view failure as an asset is the hallmark of an entrepreneurial environment. Randy also says that when he sees people who have never had a failure, he wonders what they have really learned from their experiences. On the most basic level, all learning comes from failure. Think of a baby learning to walk. He or she starts out crawling and then falling before finally mastering the skill that as an adult we take for granted. As a child gets older, each new feature, from catching a baseball to doing algebra, is learned the same way, by experimenting until you are finally successful. We don't expect a child to do everything perfectly the first time, nor should we expect adults who take on complex tasks to get it all right the first time either. I've come to believe that the most powerful learning comes from experiencing failures as well as successes. It is also nearly impossible to learn anything without doing it yourself, by experimenting along the way and by recovering from the inevitable failures. You can't learn to play soccer by reading the rulebook. You can't learn to play the piano by studying sheets of music. And you can't learn to cook by reading recipes. I'm reminded of my time as a graduate student in neuroscience. I had taken several courses in which we learned the principles of neurophysiology. Although I could pass a written test on the material, it wasn't until I was in the lab, dissecting nerves under a microscope, impaling them with tiny electrodes, and manually turning the dials on the oscilloscope, that I fully understood the concepts. Likewise, you can read as many books on leadership as you want, but until you experience the challenges that face real leaders, you will never be prepared to take charge. The Mayfield Fellows Program, which I co-direct with Tom Byers, a professor in management science and engineering at Stanford, gives students this opportunity. After 1 quarter of classroom work, during which we offer an in-depth introduction to entrepreneurship through case studies, the 12 students in this 9-month program spend the summer working in startup companies. They take on key roles in each business and are closely mentored by senior leaders in the company. They experience firsthand what it is like to identify and address the white-hot risks that face each organization, the stresses of making decisions with incomplete information, and the challenge of leading in an ever-changing environment. After the intense summer experience, the students come back to class for 10 weeks of debriefing about what happened in their respective companies. Each student leads a class on an important issue that evolved during their internship. The students in the Mayfield Fellows Program have profound insights about what it means to run a fast-paced business in a dynamic environment. They watch these companies struggle with issues such as running out of cash, retooling after a change in the senior management team, the challenge of getting cutting-edge technology to work, and the daunting task of competing against giants in the industry. By the end of the summer, the students realized that only a handful of the companies for which they worked will be in business in a year or two. Despite all of the efforts of talented teams, many of them will fail. The entire venture capital industry essentially invests in failures, since the majority of the companies they fund eventually go under. Other industries have a similar success rate, including the toy industry, the movie business, and the publishing industry. Consider book publishing. According to Nielsen Bookscan, of the approximately 1.2 million different books in print in 2004, only 25,000 or 2% sold more than 5,000 copies, and the average book in the US sells less than 500 copies. However, it is nearly impossible to predict which ones will be the big hits. As a result, publishers continue to produce many different books, hoping that each will be a success, but knowing that only a tiny fraction will make it onto the bestseller list. Publishers, toy makers, movie producers, and venture capitalists understand that the path to success is littered with failures. Mir Imran, a serial entrepreneur, has started dozens of companies, many in parallel. His success rate has been remarkable, considering that in almost every environment, most startups fail. When asked about his success rate, Mir admits that the key is killing projects early. He uses a brutal process to weed out projects with a low likelihood of success and puts increased energy into those with a high likelihood of making it to the finish line. He uses considerable discipline and analysis in the early stages, prior to launching a new venture, to increase the chances that it will thrive in the long run. Even though it is always difficult to abandon a project, it is much easier in the early stages of a venture before there is an enormous escalation of committed time and energy. This happens in all parts of our lives, including jobs, stock investments, and any type of relationship. Leonardo da Vinci once stated, "It is easier to resist at the beginning than at the end." Bob Sutton, an expert on organizational behavior, describes the Da Vinci rule in detail in his book, The No Asshole Rule, where he talks about leaving jobs that are not a good match as soon as you discover they are untenable. Here, he generalizes this much more broadly. Although most people know that sunk costs shouldn't be considered in making a decision, the too much invested to quit syndrome is a powerful driver of human behavior. We justify all the time, effort, suffering, and years that we devote to something by telling ourselves and others that there must be something worthwhile and important about it, or we never would have sunk so much of our lives into it. Quitting is actually incredibly empowering. It's a reminder that you control the situation and can leave whenever you like. You don't have to be your own prison guard, keeping yourself locked up in a place that isn't working. But that doesn't mean quitting is easy. I've quit jobs that were a bad match and abandoned failing projects, and in each case it was terribly difficult. We're taught that quitting is a sign of weakness, although in many circumstances it's just the opposite. Sometimes quitting is the bravest alternative because it requires you to face your failures and announce them publicly. The great news is that quitting allows you to start over with a clean slate, and if you take the time to evaluate what happened, quitting can be an invaluable learning experience. When Randy Komisar left his vice president position at Claris, a computer software company that spun out of Apple Computer, he felt he had failed. Randy, who had a clear vision of what he wanted to accomplish, left Claris when he realized he was never going to achieve his goal. Randy's failure was very public, and it stung badly. However, within a short time, Randy realized that being released from this job provided him with an opportunity to re-evaluate his passions and determine how we could best use his skills. For instance, it became clear that one reason he felt so dissatisfied at Claris was that he was neither passionate about the product nor about what he was doing. He loved thinking about the company's big picture and scoping out its vision, but he was hardly inspired by the day-to-day management issues. When Randy was asked to become CEO of a new company, he suggested instead he work with the CEO to set the direction for the company. In this way, he crafted a brand new role for himself, virtual CEO, and was subsequently able to become involved with dozens of companies, many at the same time. He served as a coach, sounding board, and advisor for CEOs, but didn't have the day-to-day responsibilities. This suited him and the company as well. The failure allowed me to better align my passions with the opportunities around me, says Randy. This is a poignant reminder that learning when to call it quits is crucial. You need to know when to stop pounding on an idea that isn't working and when to move on to something new. There are actually many ways to turn a failure into success. One memorable story about transforming a big disappointment into a big win came out of the innovation tournament, in which students had to create value from rubber bands in 5 days. One team decided to create a wishing tree. They identified a tree in the center of the campus across from the university bookstore and wrapped the trunk with chicken wire. They then used rubber bands to attach messages to the chicken wire. The idea was that anyone passing by could post a wish on the tree. The team promoted it widely using online networking sites, email lists, and by literally standing in front of the tree inviting passers-by to post a wish. Unfortunately, people just weren't interested. In an attempt to build momentum, the team started seeding the tree with wishes. This had little effect. They then became more aggressive in their promotion and more actively invited passers-by to contribute. Again, this had little impact. But the students' disappointment was amplified by the fact that not more than 50 feet away, a similar project was getting lots of attention. Another team had created a huge web of large rubber bands from which they invited students to suspend their secrets. The rubber band web was brimming with hundreds of brightly colored papers, each with a different secret. They fluttered in the light breeze in sharp contrast to the nearly naked wishing tree next door. The wishing tree team decided to chalk this one up as a failure. However, they didn't stop there. They extracted as much as they could from this experience by making a provocative 3-minute video documenting the failure. The team described all of their attempts to make the wishing tree successful and compared their failure to the success of the web of secrets. They very publicly celebrated their failure and shared what they had learned about the stickiness of wishes versus secrets. Stories, products, and websites are sticky when they hold your attention and don't let go. They also made it clear that this was just one step along the path to the next idea and the next and the next. Because even great ideas require an immense amount of work to reach a successful outcome, it's incredibly hard to know when to keep pushing on a problem, hoping for a breakthrough, and when to walk away. We all know that persistence is to be admired, but when does it become foolish to continue working on something that's never going to fly? Jill Pincina, CEO of Wikia, describes the dilemma wonderfully. If you throw gasoline on a log, all you get is a wet log. But if you throw gasoline on a small flame, you get an inferno. That is, it's important to know whether you're putting energy into something that has the potential to pay off. This is one of life's biggest challenges. We often stay in dead-end situations way too long. This occurs when companies commit to a doomed product or project, or when individuals stay with jobs or in relationships that make them miserable, hoping the situation will improve. So how do you know when to quit? This is a huge philosophical question. It's always a mammoth challenge to separate your desire to make something work from the reality of the probability that it will work. Of course, the more you put into a project, the more likely it is to succeed. But some efforts will never pan out, no matter how much time, money, or sweat is injected. The most scientific answer I've found is listen to your gut and look at your alternatives. Essentially, you have to negotiate honestly with yourself. Do you have the fortitude to push through the problems in front of you to reach a successful outcome, or are you better off taking another path? So quitting is hard, but it's even harder to do it well. I've seen people quit gracefully and others quit so clumsily that they leave a huge crater in their wake. As discussed in detail in Chapter 8, you are likely to bump into the same people again and again in life, often in unexpected ways. This alone is reason enough to make sure that when you quit, you do so with careful thought about the consequences for those around you. Besides the impact that quitting gracefully might have on you later, it is just the right thing to do. You can never rationalize quitting in such a way that you hurt your colleagues, friends, or former business. A colleague told me about his assistant who was doing a terrific job. He gave her great reviews and spent a lot of time talking with her about her career path within his group. She made it clear that ultimately she hoped to move into a different field, and my colleague was supportive of this. In fact, he told her he would be delighted to serve as a reference for her anytime. With this as a backdrop, my colleague couldn't have been more surprised when his assistant came in one day and gave 2 weeks' notice. The team was in the midst of a huge project, the deadline 3 weeks away. She was going to leave 1 week before the project was completed, putting the entire team in a very difficult position. My colleague asked her several times if she would consider staying 1 more week to help him get to the end of the project, which involved dozens of people directly and several thousands indirectly. She refused, saying, "I know you're going to be unhappy that I'm leaving no matter when I go, so I decided to do what I want." My colleague felt as though he'd been kicked in the stomach. It was nearly impossible to fill in the holes she left during the last week of the project, and everyone worked around the clock to try to fill the void. All those who worked with her will remember that decision. Despite the fact that she did a terrific job while she was with the team, the damage she did to her reputation during the last weeks of her employment dwarfed all the positive things that she had done in prior years. In sharp contrast, I've seen others quit jobs with remarkable style, even if they were leaving because the job wasn't a good match. The grace with which they left made such a positive impression that everyone involved would be pleased to give them a glowing recommendation at any time in the future. They provided enough notice to fill any gaps. They took the time to put their work in order so that someone else could pick up where they left off. And they even offered to help with the transition. These folks are heroes. They mastered the art of quitting well and used their skill to turn a bad situation into something positive. So how do you prepare yourself for inevitable failures? People who spend their time on creative endeavors know that failure is a natural part of the creative process and are ready when it happens. Jeff Hawkins gets worried when things go too smoothly, knowing that failure must be lurking around the corner. When he was running Handspring, everything was going swimmingly for the release of the original Visor, a new personal digital assistant. But Jeff kept warning his team that something would happen, and it did. Within the first few days of the release of their first product, they shipped out 100,000 units. This was remarkable, but the entire billing and shipping system broke down. Some customers didn't receive the products they paid for, and others received 3 or 4 times as many units as they ordered. This was a disaster, especially for a new business that was trying to build its reputation. So what did they do? The entire team, including Jeff, buckled down and called each and every customer. They asked each person what he or she had ordered, if they had received it, and whether they had been billed correctly. If anything was perfect, the company corrected. If anything wasn't perfect, the company corrected it on the spot. The key point is that Jeff knew something would go wrong. He wasn't sure what it would be, but was prepared to deal with anything that came their way. His experience has taught him that failure is inevitable and that the key to success is not dodging every bullet, but being able to recover quickly. This theme comes up again and again when listening to those who have been successful. They are willing to try lots of things and are confident that some of their experiments will lead to great outcomes. But they also recognize that there will be potholes along the way. This approach can be used for big and small challenges. Consider the following story, told to me by a friend. There was a man who appeared to have endless luck with women. He wasn't particularly charming, funny, smart, or attractive, so it was quite a mystery. One day, my friend asked him how he managed to have such a steady flow of women in his life. He confided that it was simple. He asked every attractive woman he met for a date, and some of them said yes. He was willing to take his share of rejections in return for a handful of successes. This brings the lesson to its basest level. If you get out there and try lots of things, you're much more likely to find success than someone who waits around for the phone to ring. This story is consistent with the advice my father always gave me. Being a squeaky wheel rarely changes the outcome, but it does allow you to get the conclusion sooner. Don't sit around waiting for a yes that will never come. It's better to get to know sooner rather than later, so you can put your energy into opportunities with a higher likelihood of success. This applies to job hunting, finding business funding, dating, and most other endeavors. That is, if you continue to push the limits and are willing to fail along the way, you will very likely find success. These stories highlight an important point. A successful career is not a straight line, but a wave with ups and downs. And I will continue this chapter next time.